I don't think got any public comment. Kathy, did you get any public comment?
No, I did not.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to changes to the agenda. There is one addition to the beginning. We're going to do a discussion briefly about tourism funding. We'll do that after the county administrator's report, or kind of add that to the county administrator's report. But that's the only change. It hasn't been officially added to the agenda, but we figured we could start a conversation now and then add it to the next agenda if the committee feels that we would like to have a longer discussion about it. And that is, I'm going to move past chair's report. That is the one thing I want to give a little extra time to. Are there any committee member reports? Martha.
Hi, good morning, folks. Just wanted to let you know that the IDA Housing Committee is meeting this afternoon, actually. We're talking about a policy to establish a way for housing projects to contribute to affordable housing in the future. So I guess Mike and Annie know about this being on the IDA. I just wanted to mention it. And then I hope we'll bring a policy to the IDA for a vote in July.
Martha, is this an effort to explore a requirement for a minimum amount of affordable housing in to receive an abatement?
Yeah, it's to respond to a lot, not just the city setting something up for 20% of the units being required, but to be affordable. We've been talking about this a long time. Yes, that's the idea. There are like two flavors of response being expected. One is for a certain number of percentage of units to be held as affordable for at least 20 years. The other is for a one-time financial commitment payment to the Community Housing Development Fund. For in lieu of establishing a set aside of affordable units for 20 years. So we're trying to establish the right numbers there.
And while we're talking about the IDA, was it a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was the request to track the percentage of local labor on development projects. Do we have any data reports out on that?
You know, there have been some conversations about it. I don't think we have, you know, Andy, maybe you remember, or Mike, there haven't been that many projects passed under that policy. So you'd think there'd be a lot of information. There's not that much information, but we can go back and look.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful to get that data. I know that that was something that the IDA wanted to explore first, because I know there's some positions like a crane operator, for one, that was one that was brought up to me, that we don't actually have a crane operator locally, or a company that's a crane operator. So we have to be really thoughtful about that particular piece, but I hadn't heard any information. So it would be wonderful to get an update on that. I can also talk to Heather, of course, and ask her to come in, but I figured I would ask you all.
Yeah, no, we've seen data on it. And I think it is kind of all over the lot, where certain things, there's like a high level of, like solar projects, a high level of local labor. Other things, as you said, are not, can't be done that way. So it's certainly something to ask her this morning.
And the last thing on that, Martha or Mike or Ann, we've talked a lot about at the state level, I know some here over the last couple months, about workforce development. And that could be an opportunity also, not just sort of identifying where to create a local labor policy, but where workforce development can be developed locally.
I mean, I'm glad that you guys brought this up, actually. There had been some talk before about doing like something like Madison County has. Annie and I have talked about that before. We were in that data collection stage, so it's good, yeah, if we were to ask where we are with that data collection, because it seemed like we were pretty far along, and that was quite a while ago, actually. So.
Right, I think now is an even better time, if it's possible, to have that with when you have the economic turndown, and I'm assuming that most people want to support local labor, and also less chance of bringing people in at from an area with a higher incident of COVID also. If we can avoid
I also,
that.
sorry, Annie. I also remember we did have a big spreadsheet with a lot of that data, and I believe Heather was working with some Cornell students earlier in the year. They were going to really dig into it more deeply.
Yeah, and that was the one I hadn't heard of yet. I knew that was something that they were going to do, and that we were eventually going to explore policy on that. So it'd be great to see that data if she has it. Of course, we have no idea what COVID did to that effort. So that would be wonderful to hear. Thank you all for that update. Martha, what time is that meeting? The housing committee?
Yeah, let me look. I think it's at 2:00 today. 2:00 today.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else have a committee members report for any of our liaison appointments? Kathy, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to remind you to do the minutes before we forget to.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. There is a committee that hasn't been meeting that we're going to restart the conversation, hopefully start meeting, and that is the Landlord Liaison Task Force. Although the funding to actually move forward with any recommendations from that committee is one of the pieces, I think, in the budget that we have on hold, Jason, if I understand correctly, but we can still move forward with the committee to explore and come up with recommendations. Is that correct?
Yes, we pulled back the funding this year just with all the financial challenges. So.
Yep. So minutes approval for May 28th, 2020. Can I have someone move those? Mike moves. Annie seconds, since you're the only two I can see. Does anybody have any questions, comments about the minutes? All right, we need to do a roll call. Mike?
Yes.
Annie?
Yes.
Martha?
Yes.
Henry?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that is unanimous. County Administrator's report.
Good morning, everyone. I don't have anything specific to report with respect to Housing and Economic Development Committee right now. Just got off the phone with elected officials, EOC's on the phone with nonprofits for our morning Thursday call. I can answer any questions you'd like around COVID or anything else, but I don't have anything specific to report on right now.
If you could talk, Jason, to this group a little bit, maybe a quick summary before I go to questions about where we are with phase 4 opening. We're opening on Friday.
Sure, I can talk about that.
Economic Development Committee, this might be good.
Right. I got something to talk about with that. I'm sorry. Phase 4. So we are set to move to open reopen phase 4 sectors as of Friday for Southern Tier. And I get, you're right. I have a little more to talk about than that. So there is a limited opening with certain sectors for phase 4, and so things like malls, gyms are not authorized to reopen in phase 4. But there are certain industries that have been identified in the New York Forward website that have had guidance. Higher ed does have guidance related to it. So there's a lot of information that's just come out over the past few days. I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to review it all, but those industries that have been identified, some can open on Friday, and the expectation is that we are kind of into the higher risk industries and sectors right now where there's more density, which has a potential higher infection rate. So the state, both from the state folks that have done the control room calls as well as the governor's press conference, has been consistent in that, there's going to be a slow kind of methodology and review of how they open some of these other sectors, and in some of the ones that are open, increase capacity over the course of the next several weeks. There isn't a time frame on some of this. So for example, malls, gyms don't have a time frame. They're learning new information across the country about these different sectors and how to best apply their approaches to them. There is also a travel advisory that the governor announced in the tri-state region, both in partnership with Connecticut and New Jersey, that basically says if anybody coming into the state from those hot spot states or states that have high infection rates, and they're on the state website as to what those ones are that they've been flagged, are requested to go into a 14-day quarantine. It's not necessarily an enforceable quarantine. Although the state isn't going to enforce it, they're going to require us to address it, although they haven't really given us clear guidance as to how they want to do that yet. So we're waiting for more on them in that. Our approach will be the same as we have in the past, is when we're made aware of issues, we'll continue to do public education on it, and B, if we're brought attention to issues, we'll start with dialogue and discussion with those individuals and folks to try to get them to voluntarily comply, which we've had a lot of success with. This potentially could be challenging in a few different areas. Could impact tourism negatively, more so than it already exists. It could impact other industries in terms of travel and commerce. I will say that the state wants to put out an essential services list that would probably be treated along the lines of that if you are not symptomatic, you would not be required to quarantine if you fit under an essential service until such point in time you may become symptomatic, which is how we deal with essential providers and essential services to date. So that's still to come. There's supposed to be some New York State Department of Health guidance on a lot of this in the next 2 days. So that's a little bit about phase 4. There is no phase 5 or 6 at this stage of the game. So sectors that have opened in prior phases but have limited capacities, what I would expect is that there'll just be announcements as to when those capacities could increase. There isn't another phase to it. And then the sectors that aren't allowed to reopen as part of phase 4 on Friday, they'll be allowed to reopen at some point in the future, but we don't have timelines.
So the gyms and I can't remember the other two, those will open, but outside the context of any of the phases. It'll just be an independent.
I think probably moving forward is just all one phase 4, but they're just not going to be able to open on Friday. It'll have to be some other point in time.
There was a study that Cuomo alluded to yesterday, and then Annie, I will definitely get to your question just to finalize your report. About increased risks specifically in gyms and malls, and I can't remember the third. Do you know anything about, have they shared anything about that study?
No, they haven't, other than, the state's been fairly diligent in slowing the reopening. And I think that's probably worked to our advantage in terms of you haven't seen a resurgence of cases. Now we're getting into the higher risk activities where you may have higher probability of infection and spread. So I think they're cautious. I know what's happening around the states and the country right now is probably, I know it's causing a challenge and stress on K through 12 school districts that are trying to develop reopening plans, and the state hasn't given clear guidance on that because of what's going on. So this is going to fluctuate and be fluid, and will we see a spike at some point in time? Possibly. It is as you have more reopening activity. It may be likely, but we're diligent in our community. And the state's taking a very slow process to reopening, which is good. So it's still a lot of uncertainty on guidance with some of this stuff, and I don't think it's changing as it has been on a week-to-week basis.
Annie and Martha, did you have your hand up? It was up and then went down again. All right, I see it up. Annie, you want to go first, and then Martha?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Jason, for that report. So just thinking about tourism or people from here going out to visit some place that, although it's hard for me to imagine going to visit a place with higher precedent, or higher incident of COVID, but I have family in some of those areas. So I guess some people might consider that, or they have work or something too. But I'm wondering if at some point you can kind of keep your ear out. If people could come back from those areas and get tested, would that fit the criteria? That you get tested, you get your results in a couple of days, and if that would, rather than being quarantined for 2 weeks, because that would be hard to come back to either go to work or be with your family, or as you said, for tourists or people that want to visit this area.
So one thing to keep in mind is that this isn't new. The 14-day quarantine, if we think about what was in early March and mid-March, that was very much what was expected. So while definitely inconvenient and challenging, it's not as if it's a new request of us. Bless you. The other question that, the concern, to kind of speak to a little bit of your first point about testing, is yes, folks could definitely get tested when they come back. The question is they may not be symptomatic, it still might be negative, but 5 days later they may be positive. It all depends on it all depends on contact and exposure. So I don't know how this is the first day of the travel advisory when it's been issued. This time next week, as the way this whole thing's been going the past 4 months, I'm sure it'll be different, and we'll have some new guidance and direction. But your points are well taken, Ann. As people have talked a little bit about the quarantine, I remind them of, you're right, it's 14 is a long time, but let's think about what it was the second, third week of March. That was the same conversation we were having. People coming in from international flights, boom, they'd be quarantined for 14 days. So I don't know really what to say other than we'll keep putting out information as we get updates and guidance from the state on it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Martha?
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jason. This is such a minefield. If when somebody is in quarantine now, we support them. I mean, if somebody with, we do contact tracing, we do shopping, whatever we do, are we going to have to do that kind of thing?
Well, I mean, if we go back to where we were mid-February to mid-March, when folks were in quarantine, now remember, quarantine is for the healthy, isolation is for the sick. Remember that? That gives them some flashbacks, right?
Yeah.
Of the early days of this. So even folks that are in quarantine, if there are essential needs and we're aware of that, and they need essential needs, then we will coordinate the providing of those essential needs. Now, we did that before. We'll do it again. And it's, the good thing is we've been down this path. We just have to learn as from what we learned before, and then re-implement it if that's the case. So if we have individuals that are in quarantine or isolation, as we have all along, and they need some form of support that they can't get, we have the ability to coordinate that with different providers and support systems to be able to get them what they need, whether it's food and so on and so forth. Okay.
And would you talk a little bit about the budget conversation you had with Rob Mujica, and where we feel we are with state money? I know this update, but we might want to chat about it here.
I can speak to it. On Tuesday, Budget Director Mujica was on the phone, really giving an update about the Phase 4 reopening and kind of what I just shared with you. Since no one else was asking the questions, I asked the questions about EFMAP funding and community college funding. I asked, where, it's been discussed that we'll be getting EFMAP funding distributed to us. Can we get a timeline? He said, you should be getting it ASAP. It's in the works, meaning we should get it in the next week or two. Okay. I didn't ask specifically about us because I knew he wouldn't have the answer, but that was good reassurance. And I figured if it came from the budget director, it's got to be somewhat accurate. The other thing is TC3 funding and community college funding. At that point in time on Tuesday, they had not received their payment that they were supposed to get on Friday, which was the quarterly payment. That was the impetus of a conversation we had with Cortland County and TC3 about cash flow concerns, that if they don't get this payment, there's going to be severe cash flow constraints come mid-July. I was notified yesterday that they did get a partial payment, which was 80% of their quarterly payment. That it corresponds to what Director Mojica said, and that the state is delaying many of their, or deferring or reducing many of their state aid payments by 20%. And for several reasons. One, and this is consistent with, I think, an article Henry had sent out to the legislature that the Times Union had posted about AIM aid for cities. I had heard the same thing, and this is consistent with the hearings that the state is delaying payments or reducing state aid payments by 20% because the state is going through liquidity challenges right now. They have liquidity problems, they have their own cash flow constraints, and that essentially the governor is waiting for a stimulus package to be considered by the feds. And if there's some relief that comes from the federal government, it was supposed to be June, then it's supposed to be July, now it's supposed to be August. So they're reducing, or they're holding back on full state aid payments to be able to make a decision that should there not be a stimulus package that may reflect into what type of cut we could anticipate in state aid versus making a full payment and then cutting or clawing back prior payments. So that's the approach the state is taking to address some of the liquidity issues.
Okay, thanks. And I assume that the EFMAP question was just about the new funding for counties through the CARES Act and not about reconciliation of prior years reimbursements.
I did not ask about reconciliation.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jason, for the update. I want to move forward to the addition to the agenda. I have asked for a few people from the STPB to join us. I'm so glad to see Kelly and Josh, Kelly Cartmill, who's the chair of STPB, and Josh, who's been working with the ACOD grants with Nick, exploring those. One of the conversations that have been happening over email with Dan, I see Dan is here as well, and has been brought up in previous meetings as a question. I think in the full legislature, Dan, you may have brought it up once, specifically about the impact of the reduction in tourism funding or room tax on the different organizations that receive funding. Of course, as everybody knows, ACOD did receive grants. That grant process did go through. All of the other grants were suspended this year. So although we normally give out 88, I think it's about 88, and I see Katie is here as well, and Nick, if you guys want to turn on your videos and join us, that would be lovely. Thank you. Typically, we give out about 88 a year. Is that correct, Nick?
88 awards?
Yeah, I think independent awards, if I recall.
Yeah, it varies from year to year, but that's for discussion purposes. Sure.
Okay. And this year we only did the ACOD, is that correct?
Yeah, so this year the ACOD awards were recommended and approved in I believe early March. I'll double check my notes. And it was really all the other grant programs were sort of in process of collecting applications and evaluating applications as the pandemic began to unfold. And we were beginning to understand the consequences of that, both on our budget and on our ability to deliver those services. So the ACOD grants were the only program that was awarded funding this year out of the tourism program for any grants.
So I'm just giving a little bit of background for everyone. So typically there are nonprofits that apply for multiple different grants. This is the only one that went through. And the ACOD specifically, so people know the history or the infrastructure of it, it can cover a maximum of 10% of operations, if I recall correctly, Nick.
That's correct. The awards are capped at either 10% of an organization's operational budget or $35,000.
Okay. And then the last piece of information, just context of where it's at, is that We have had a reduction from typical what we were expecting of $3 million, and we have an estimate right now of 1.8, although it could be less than that. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That forecast was developed in sort of late March, early April, to account for the what we were expecting in terms of the lost revenue. We have, we should get the second quarter room tax report here shortly, and in the early July, probably just after the holiday.
And how much of that funding is allocated already?
100%. I mean, we're already of that. I can, I could show you that, the problem that we ran into, and the reason we had to do a budget adjustment, is because our existing commitments to various organizations exceeded our forecast for our revenue. Mm-hmm. So that's why we had to reduce our budget.
So we have over 1.8 already allocated, but we may take in less than that is where we are right now.
It's entirely possible. It's, we're all, staring into the crystal ball a little bit, and there are variables that are totally outside of our control relating to whether there's a second wave of the pandemic, what our higher ed institutions decide to or not to do, and other state or federal regulations that may play into the picture. So where I think we're all just at this point, if there's a major shift in what we expect at any point, we'll have another look at that forecast and attempt to recalibrate it.
And we have asked, of the grants that we've already given, we have asked for a reduction of, and I have a bug on my glasses. We have asked for ACOD as well as the other organizations to adjust their budgets by a reduction of 30% for the third quarter. Have we gone ahead and asked for them to make an adjustment to the fourth quarter payments?
So what we've asked for all contracts, all of the entities that are funded through the room tax, through the tourism program, we're asking for a 30% overall reduction. So it's not from the third or fourth quarter; it's their entire year's budget. Mm-hmm. So that will actually be higher than 30% for those two quarterly payments in terms of the impact. Okay. So contract modifications are in process presently, and we're working through that with various organizations that are affected.
And there's one last thing, I'm sorry, in addition, I think it's really important that everybody has all of the context for any discussion of room tax, so we know what money we're dealing with or not. The TCAD, I think there's been some confusion. I may ask Jason to step in on this as well. We have an agency as a government that we contract out for economic development. That is a concept. They are considered a supporting agency. They happen to, because we have decided, they happen to get we have chosen to take some money from room tax to pay for that contract. But it is not in the same bucket as tourism per se. It's just a bucket of where we have chosen. Last year, if everybody remembers, we chose to have a reduction in how much that was coming out of room tax and shift to more coming from property tax. But it's sort of a different beast than a tourism agency that we're working with. Jason, do you want to add anything to that? Just again, so we're laying groundwork for the discussion.
Yes, you're correct. The legislature has chosen that it decides to fund its obligations as it sees fits. And in this case, you've decided for this year to use X amount of hotel tax to do it. Next year, it's a different amount. And then future years, it's a lower amount as you extended the 5-year aspect of that agreement. One thing I'll add is that in that contract, there is a kind of a circuit breaker that should hotel tax decrease. Nick, I think I have this right. If it decreases more than 10% or more in 2 consecutive quarters compared to the prior year, we have the ability to open the contract. The second quarter will be at the end of June in 6 days. It most likely, I would assume, is probably going to be below 10%. So I'll come to you in July and suggest some amendment, which would be consistent really with what we've already assumed in our overall general fund projections, and that, you know, you not use the full amount that's been that you budgeted for in your budget of room tax to offset your obligation for that. You will just essentially account for it in a shortfall of revenue with a lot of the other revenues that we've already accounted a shortfall in. So it'll just be an adjustment in the actual amount of expected receipt revenue from hotel tax, but we've already accounted for that in the general fund projections that I talked to you in May, and I'll refresh with you again on Tuesday at the expanded budget committee meeting. So that'll be accounted for. So that's the TCAD agreement, but it's not part of the tourism program per se. So it's really a separate discussion and separate issue. And TCAD is treated as a supporting agency, and they've experienced a reduction in their third quarter payment, as have all of your supported agencies, which was based on our last discussion in May. And we'll be talking about that again on Tuesday about fourth quarter reductions, possibly for supporting agencies as well, as the financial picture hasn't improved, so to speak.
So the 1.8 that we have allocated already is the some, which is the administrative county, some which is TCAD, some which is CVB, some which is ACOD. Is there anything I'm missing?
Yeah, a few other agencies that are paid out of that include the Downtown Ithaca Alliance. They operate 2 programs related to downtown ambassadors and festivals. This also includes Cornell Cooperative Extension, Tompkins County, which does beautification work throughout the county. This includes funding that goes to the county historian, that goes to the Workforce Development Board. This includes funding also for Community Arts Partnership that is separate from ACOD, which is just general operating support to that organization, and a public art program they've been developing for the past few years, and various marketing efforts they have supported. I don't believe I missed anybody off the top of my head. If I do,
I think that sets some groundwork. So I see Martha's hand. This is a context, just opening up for discussion. There is a question of for the funding that's going to the arts and culture organizations through an ACOD, of concern of their current fiscal state of health, and what role we play or could play in that. And so I'm going to open it up to a question from Martha. That's the only hand I see, and I don't know if anybody else wants to speak after Martha, but please raise your hand.
Thanks, Anna. Jason, you lost me in the TCAD discussion. We assume we'll have 2 quarters of 10%. That'll trigger the circuit breaker. So what happens then?
I'll come forward with you with a recommendation about essentially, reducing the amount of room tax that the general fund depends upon to support that specific contract, along with the other 3 elements, the 10% administration and the planning position. Those are separate, but I've already accounted for that in our general fund estimates as a revenue shortfall. So I don't know that it's really more of a transactional discussion. At the end of the day, the challenge with this is that it technically would be able to free up funds for the tourism program or other programs, but it really doesn't, because you have such a dismal receipt of revenues. So in this case, it's really, I think, setting more of a discussion for the future years as to whether or not you want to continue to utilize or redistribute, utilize hotel tax to offset your commitment to TCAD, or do you want to replace it with property tax? So that I'll come to you with that, but I've already accounted for it in our financial projection. So it doesn't really have an impact at the end of the day, because we already
What do you mean?
We've already accounted for the loss in revenue.
What do you mean you've accounted for it? You mean you're expecting to replace the tourism cut with property tax?
No, what I'm saying is that when we did our general fund revenue shortfall estimates in May,
Uh-huh.
I accounted for a reduction in hotel tax that we used in the general fund to support, the general fund. So I've already accounted for the expected reduction in that revenue.
I guess I'm trying to find out. So let's pretend, I don't remember the split. Let's pretend TCAD's allocation from us is half property and half room tax.
That's about what it is, yeah.
Okay, what a clever guess. So you've set up for this third quarter a reduction of all agency allocations from property tax.
Right.
They're already expecting or under that contract adjustment.
Yep.
For that part. So for the tourism piece, that'll also be adjusted starting in the third quarter?
No, there isn't a direct correlation to the hotel tax that you use to offset your commitment to TCAD as there is with the tourism program. So in this case, they're two separate, they can't be viewed as the same thing. You make a commitment to TCAD, you've decided that over time you want to slowly use less room tax to offset your commitment to TCAD. So that's a contract that you have with them. You give them X amount of dollars, and then you decide to fund that through whatever mechanisms you want to fund it. In this case, you say we're going to use half of it, we're going to use X amount of dollars of hotel tax. In this instance, there is not a direct correlation to the amount of hotel tax that's received and how much that goes to TCAD. In this case, you use it to offset your commitment. So in this case, as hotel tax is decreased, all it accounts for in the general fund, because it's a general fund allotment, not a TCAD allotment. The hotel tax goes to the general fund to support the general fund's commitment to TCAD. In this case, all it is a revenue shortfall in the general fund, no different than sales tax, mortgage tax, any other revenue, general fund revenue, because that's what's considered an unallocated general fund revenue.
So we will treat TCAD as any other agency and look at their allocation as a piece and not separate it.
Correct. So it's similar to any supporting agency. So TCPL, all your human service agencies, Human Service Coalition, all of them were in that bucket of a 25% reduction for their third quarter payment.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I have Dan next.
Thank you. What I would like to see is the same thing I've been asking for since March, since the March meeting of this committee, which is a little bit of a deeper dive into the arts and culture organizations that we support, that we help support, to get a really good snapshot of their financial health and their outlook. There was a small something done in April, which I asked to see the data for, but I have not seen that. So I don't know exactly what was unearthed there, but what it did conclude was that 5 of the arts and culture organizations that we support did not have confidence that they were going to survive this summer. We are now in the summer. So in my opinion, we're in an emergency situation in terms of these arts and culture organizations. And that is my goal in speaking today. It's my goal and why I've been speaking at all these different meetings, to try to raise the alarm, to have other people see that these arts and culture organizations might be in an end-of-life situation. And if they are, I want to know if we can do something about it. So again, what I'm asking for is a better analysis of where these organizations are at right now, and if they are in dire danger, what it would take to help them survive for some amount of time going forward. We are in a position to do this. I want to remind everyone that the tourism money, the rules about how we spend the hotel tax revenue are our rules, Tompkins County's rules. We are not under any state obligation except to use them for tourism purposes, which this falls under. And as I've said, I find this kind of a state of emergency, because if the State Theater, for example, goes out of business, or the Hangar Theater, or the Kitchen Theater, at a time when we had actually money to help them survive, to get through this crisis, and we failed to act, then I feel like we failed as a entity that is involved in their health and survival. A couple other small points I want to make. We just did talk about TCAD, but there is another little pool of funding that they get through the hotel room tax, and that is to administer the tourism capital grants, I believe it's called. And that money was cut by 30%, but they're still getting, I can't remember the exact number, it's like $8,000 this year or something like that, for a grant program that's not happening, right? The grants don't go out. So I'm just using that as an example to, first of all, because we specifically talked about TCAD, but also just to point out that there is money out there that we can rethink and reprioritize if saving the State Theater is something that matters to this committee and to the legislature, then it's something we can do. I also want to point out that there was a 30% across the board cut in the budgets to these programs. Is that roughly accurate, Nick?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay, and that's fine. That's one way to approach it, but I would say that an even amount across the board cut is really not the most, not the best way to apply a revenue shortfall. In fact, the chair of the Tompkins County Budget Committee has said as much for the other organizations and the departments that Tompkins County funds. We don't really want to do an across the board cut. And I'm just bringing that up to show again that there are ways to find money. It's not fair to just say, well, all the money's spent, so there's nothing we can do. The last thing I want to say for now is that what I've heard from the reports at this committee is a lot of talk about the hotels and what it's going to take to get tourism back in this county. And of course, that's important stuff. But the resumption of tourism is something that's largely out of our control. It's not something that Tompkins County can do much about. We're operating in an environment, we're just a tiny drop in the ocean of what's going on out there influencing tourism. What we do have the ability to do is to fund specific organizations with hotel tax money and keep them alive so that we have these assets in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. And just for clarification, Nick, of the 1.8 current estimated, which could be a lot less, but you currently have it estimated at 1.8 budget for the year, how much has already literally been spent and distributed?
That would require access to the accounting system in Dariel. I can't get you that number at this moment. It's I'd have to go back and dig into that. But here's the issue is that the invoices we received in the first and second quarter from the partners that in the program are on the basis of an assumed original 2020 budget. So we're on pace to spend. If we spend at our current rate that we have in the first and second quarter, we will burn through $3 million-ish. That's the problem that we identified in March, why we had to make a drastic budget adjustment. So I don't know the number offhand of how much we have spent, but we could provide that.
Is it
by looking at the
possible?
accounting system.
Is it possible that we've already been spent in the first and second quarter 1.5 million?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So we may be.
I spent or allocated is maybe the correct terminology. Yeah, some of the money has been allocated through, internal budget, things to the county's 10% administrative fees, my position, various other, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, Martha.
Thanks. Dan, I assume you said the chair of the budget committee has said we're not doing across the board cuts. I would hope you refrain from quoting me and out of this context. I know that we are, it's important for us to look carefully at every organization. For example, the Human Services Coalition has pretty much just finished their review process. There's a meeting tomorrow morning. I'm on that board and I'll be looking at their reviews. They've certainly got agencies that have to be, on a knife's edge of survival as well. But I would point out that in March, late March, people, nobody knew anything about what was coming. And in the meantime, the Paycheck Protection Program has been used by lots of our nonprofits to support salary. And that was money that nobody that in March, they wouldn't have any idea that that was going to be available. So there are a number of things that have changed since organizations might have said, we're not sure we're going to survive the summer. So I would really be cautious about that as a flat out statement. I certainly would encourage, as time allows, a look at each organization. I would certainly hope that they did apply for PPP, as many of the nonprofits did, the human service nonprofits did, and that should be figured into this calculation as well.
Thank you, Martha. Some of the, and I'm bringing this up to the whole committee. Thank you, Dan, for sharing that. What it seems like the conversation we're having and some of the things that I think we need is from Nick, if you can do research on and give us estimates as soon as is possible. This is my suggestion. I'll check, I'd love to hear other people's input. But how much has actually been spent in the first and second quarter, I think is really important. Because of course, if that's already at 1.5 allocated, my concern would be for organizations that have they've been performing their duties under contracts that we have with them for the first and second quarter. And then we ask for cuts for work that has been done, in the history, like previously. That's not something that I think we can do. So get a sense of what is allocated but unspent. My sense is from Dan, what you're saying is taking the money that has been allocated but not spent and reevaluating where we are distributing it. So I think that that's really important. What we would be doing here and this is where, I'm unclear, we would be scrapping our program and contracts with everyone. Is it what we're saying that we would be pulling any unspent money, putting it in a pool? Would we then be requesting that all ACOD organizations reapply to a existing pool that we have suspended our tourism program for? Would it be that we would be reevaluating and no longer in the context of the 10% ACOD grant structure, and we would be simply using any remaining funding to be a stopgap for organizations? It seems like there are a lot of questions, and what we would be asking to do would dictate what questions we would be asking of ACOD organizations. So I think this is a lot more complicated than asking what their fiscal situation is, with the expectation that we would, one, have money, and two, that we would provide aid. My question would be, how much aid? Is it whether or not we would be individually going back to the maximum 10% for the ACOD grant? Would it be that we were throwing out the structure of the ACOD grant and simply basing on any aid off of need? What need would we be evaluating? I feel like it brings up a tremendous amount of questions. So I think that's something we as a committee really would need to evaluate, and overall whether or not we feel comfortable canceling commitments that we have down to zero to pull in any remaining funding to reallocate it to a subgroup of all of the grantees. So I think it brings up a lot of questions. I see Henry's hand.
Yes. I just want to address what Martha said about the PPP and other situations. Would be that if we did the analysis, we'd find out whether or not programs got PPP money or how they're doing. I guess, you know, that all those issues that you bring up and about how we would shift the money, but at least if we would know how the ACOG funding is going with organizations, we could basically adjust that. But again, we can't even do any adjustments unless we know how they're doing. And so that was what I always thought Dan was wanting to know, was how they're doing. And so, you know, I don't see that as being a big policy issue. I just see that as following through with what Nick said we were going to do in March.
Yeah, I don't think that it is a matter of not following through, Henry. I think it's a question of us as a committee deciding, is the context that we are asking sort of a general, what are your finances? Are we asking, how have you used the ACOG funding and what has been the impact of a 30% reduction in that grant? Those are very different questions. And that which question we ask really depends on a policy decision of, are we talking about whether or not we want to evaluate the financial state of different organizations and whether or not we want to consider increasing or, you know, making sure that we give the original full ACOG funding? Or are we saying we are throwing away completely any grant structure at all? We are getting an overarching blanket financial evaluation of organizations, and our question or our policy decision is that we're exploring whether or not we can help organizations reach a level of solvency totally independent of the grant structure. Those are two very different questions and would really change the nature of the questions that are asked. I do think that's important to know from us, guidance from us, so that we don't have miscommunication of expectations. I see that there are chats, and Kelly, I see your hand.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, before you ask it or comment, Dan, you're saying that the basic question is, are you in danger of going out of business? Which is a very, seems very broad question, but I'd like to know what that means a bit more. But Kelly, please.
So couple thoughts. I just want to clarify the conversations had about all the budget cuts. I mean, I know Jason actually was in a couple of those. Katie definitely was in some of those. These were not a simple, like, let me do a 30% cut. Just to clarify, we did talk about how to possibly cut people differently based on, the real need, and then how much people would, if truly an organization just cannot survive without certain money. We did have those conversations, but ultimately it would be really hard to come before all of you and say, well, it was our opinion that this organization actually shouldn't be cut by that much. And quite frankly, those conversations centered more around CVB funding, because for us to reboot the economy, you actually need to put the money into the things that are going to reboot the hotels getting visitors again, and not just hotels, but the short-term rentals, everything, quite frankly, everywhere you guys collect your room tax from. I mean, this money is mute if you can't fix that. Like, who gets what becomes kind of a, if you can't fix the problem of, is it even there to spend? So we had a lot of those conversations, and we definitely talked about who's affected, from a standpoint of, do they close their doors? I don't want to see the State Theater close their doors. I don't want to see the Kitchen Theater close their doors. My hotel gives money to all of those places every year. But the reality is, I also don't want to see restaurants close their doors. I don't want to see 15 Steps or other shops on the Commons close their doors. And so the whole look at the entire room tax, I agree with you. That's a great thing to say to the STPB. Hey, can you form a committee and look at how this is going to affect ACOD? But I actually think that's disingenuous. We should be asking everyone we give money to, hey, are you going to close? Are you going to be, are you done if you don't have our money? I don't think we can only ask that of ACOD. As far as the PPE money, that money actually only could go to certain organizations. I know like the CVB couldn't even apply for it. So there were all sorts of issues when we did this conversation that I think we're forgetting about. And I would love to say that we can support, getting ACOD through. But the reality is, based on conversations I've had with many of those organizations, they can't even do a guess at their budgets because they don't even know when they can open their doors. They don't know what kind of occupancy they can have. I mean, when you talk to any of the ACOD people that I've talked to, and I'm not going to say their names because I'm not going to throw people under the bus and say they didn't want money, but basically they said, I don't know how to tell you what I would need because I don't actually think they can. It's the same as right now when I'm trying to give a budget to an owner. They're like, how do you think you're going to do in October? I can't tell you how I'm going to do in a week. So I don't think they're in a different situation. We can ask the question. We can take the time of people on the committee and say, hey, can we reach out to the ACOD recipients? But I actually think, to be mindful of the whole tourism program, we shouldn't just be asking ACOD. That's just my thoughts. And to clarify, I do know that our county looks at tourism money different, and that there are policies we have where we talk about trying to stabilize arts and culture, but there's by no means anything by law that states that. And the true law, the way I've always understood it, is that when you go to the state and say we want to implement a room tax, their law actually says that the room tax revenues are dedicated to local tourism development. That does include those, but it is not just for those. So I want to clarify that because that seems to get thrown around a little bit too much, I think, incorrectly.
Thank you, Kelly. Josh, your hand has been up. I apologize. And I'm going to give us a couple more minutes for this, but then I think we do need to reevaluate, like maybe even set a special meeting just to talk about this. But Josh, please. A little bit. It's very.
Is that better?
No, you're choppy.
Right. Yeah.
That's probably better.
Yep, that's better.
Okay, fantastic. Just a couple things, and I want to be clear. I am an arts consultant. I have a history in the arts. I'm also the chair of the Planning and Evaluation Committee for STPB, and I'm also the co-chair of the Budget Committee as well. So pretty familiar with our situation and our cuts. I don't believe that there's going to be anything left of that 1.8 million as far as a set aside to do anything with. I think we'll be lucky if we get to that. That's one thing. I do think that it is important for us to understand how these organizations are doing. As a funder of these organizations, prior to any next payment, we need to have a good sense of that. We don't want another wine center. If one of these organizations is going down because they've had prior debt, there may be nothing that we can do about that. I hate to say it, but I lived through the arts after the 2008,
and saw 10,000 mid-sized arts organizations shut down across our country. We won't be able to avoid that with some organizations, but if we can, we should. I think Dan makes a good point. I think there are things that we can do. There are funders organizations, there are foundations in town, there are individuals. We can get people together, and I would think with the use of CAP as a lead, perhaps, and help an organization that might be going under, or at least help that organization and that board figure out a way that they're going to shut down, maybe declare bankruptcy, but come back from this after it's over. I think the reboot and the coming back is so important.
Hey, Josh, for clarification, what you just mentioned is not necessarily using room tax, but helping them gather the information so that we can communicate to foundations their current economic status, and if they can be helped, if that is possible, that we help facilitate. That's what I just heard. Is that true?
Yeah, I have to imagine that there are board members that are scratching their heads saying, what do we do? And so I think that the reach out is to both executive directors and board presidents to say, what's going on? How are you feeling? Now, I can tell you from my conversations with some people that some of these organizations feel like they're doing quite well. They had the ability to cut their, I shouldn't say quite well, they're doing okay. They're getting by, they have a plan, they've gotten PPP money, many of these organizations have. And they are continuing to produce in one way or another. They have not been asked to give their subscription money back. Nobody's telling the hangar that they want their $150 back. They're either going to the online shows or they're not, so, but we don't know for sure. So let's get a good sense. I think let's get a good sense of where we are. The other piece of this that is worth discussing is how do we help these organizations operate in the new normal? Because, we are at the point where concerts and things are about ready to start up. Now, if we can help, let's say, for instance, the State Theater, bring people into Ithaca to eat at the restaurants, to stay overnight, then perhaps that's where, as an organization, the STPB can help out in some way, whether that's with training or personal protective equipment or additional staffing, or allowing them to produce in a way where they're only going to see a third of their audience or half of their audience. That's where I feel like we might be able to help them out. That'll have a greater economic impact for the entire community. But we don't know when that is yet. For instance, I was talking to Doug at the state the other day, and don't tell your friends about this, but right now they're thinking they may not produce at all in 2020. Okay, now that's a changing target, and that will change. And if they need help to kick into gear prior to 2021, we may be the organization to help them kick into gear. So I think that's one thing. Let's think about how do we reboot arts and culture. Let's think about how do we provide consulting or legal services to an organization that might need to defer their payments or take Chapter 11. Doesn't mean they have to go away. We just have to figure out a way to get them through this so that they can come back. And perhaps we can also provide pressure and to the state that if we do get federal money and state money, that state money is going to come to arts organizations. And maybe we can put some pressure, if we do get federal money and it goes to the state, maybe some of that can come to STPB, and we can look at how do we distribute that money, or maybe Community Arts Partnership, one or the other. How do we distribute that money? How do we help out?
I'm really glad we're having this conversation, because what you just outlined is very different than what I'm hearing from Dan, which is, and so let's just be clear, it sounds like there's two proposals on the table as a committee. There is, getting this information and overarching, how can we help facilitate, identifying what the needs are and facilitate connecting to foundation money or technical support, or and I hear you, Josh. That is, I I think that that could be valuable. My cogs are turning. This is the first specifically on that. I know, Dan, what you were talking about is getting information to potentially reallocate room tax. So I just want to, in summary, things that I'm hearing that the committee would need to consider. And I think that what our direction is really does influence what questions are asked, but more importantly, expectations that we all have and that organizations might have. Mike Sigler?
Yeah, I mean, I had much more to say, but Josh and Kelly kind of covered most everything I was going to say. I just keep looking at the numbers going, there just really isn't that much money kind of that hasn't already been allocated. And frankly, we have contracts that we already have in place, and I can't see us backing out of those contracts. I understand what Dan is saying. I mean, I definitely understand. I mean, I go to the hangar whenever I can, frankly, and I understand they're going to have challenges, as is the State Theater. But even the people we have contracted out, they're counting on these contracts, and these are the reason we make the contracts. And I can't foresee us kind of saying we're not going to fulfill those monetarily. So if there's some kind of other pool of money, I mean, I would consider that. But it was even like, when we were saying we don't have to really worry about tourism. I mean, that's kind of where this money comes from. If the tourism doesn't return, this pool is just going to continue to shrink, and then our problems deepen. So thank you, Josh and Kelly. Actually, you really did summarize kind of what I was thinking. So thanks for that.
Mark, I'm sorry.
No, that's it really. I'm hoping that, I look at something like the State Theater, who has done multiple campaigns to raise money for themselves, even to bring themselves back to a position where they could have shows there again. I mean, that was a pretty long campaign. I'm hoping they do a similar campaign for this situation, because I'm hoping it's unique. I hope this doesn't happen again, obviously in the next decade, but certainly something I hope they're doing on their own. And you look at something like the success of the Alex Haley pool just this week, with an outcry to people that says, this is important to us. This is something we want to happen. Okay. Because the money simply isn't going to be there from the hotel tax, I don't think, until we have somewhat of a recovery.
Martha, do you want to have the last?
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with Mike on that. And it just, there's a lot of nonprofit, there's a lot of philanthropy that could be stimulated. I would also point out, Kelly, thanks for reminding me that the PPP, that the CVB could not apply, was not eligible for PPP, despite Jennifer's trying to make that lobbying, that push every time every chance she talked to Tom Reed. I would point out that everybody's like hoping for federal money. Maybe the arts and culture, the tourism industry could help us with that lobbying and help, get your national constituents, national partners on this. My understanding is that if federal money does come to state and locals for lost revenue, that's the key, not just to pay for COVID expenses, which it's a tiny fraction of the dollars we're all worried about. It's about lost revenue to state and local governments. At the moment, the formula includes room tax or tourism income. So the tourism industry, which is vast nationally and includes lots of, I'll go ahead and say, red states that are apparently reluctant for their senators to support state and federal aid. The tourism industry does stand to gain if there's federal aid. So that's a key piece that we all should work together on.
So just in closing, Josh and Kelly, your input for me personally, I don't know about other committee members, is very valuable. Kelly, understanding the context and what you all looked at, and in your discussions with these agencies, really understanding and appreciating the difficulty of even estimating right now the budget needs. Josh, this is your area of expertise, so I really appreciated hearing the breadth of the conversation that you are intending to have, and the sort of survey that you and Nick have discussed of, what information you would collect, but also what potential service STPB could potentially provide. The STPB is an advisory board of reports to HED of the legislature. So as a committee, time allocation and effort, it's not a typical position of STPB. But, how does everyone feel about moving forward to collect the information with the particular idea in mind of one, getting whatever snapshot they can provide of their budget situation, but two, so that STPB could potentially use that information to evaluate what community resources might be relevant, or it sounded like Josh, so that we could potentially help the agencies craft a message about what their situation is to the community. So I guess I would ask a straw poll, or I'd ask the committee to weigh in on Josh moving forward in gathering that information in that context, because that seems like what, Josh, you were thinking. Can you catch me, Josh, if I'm off on that?
No, yes, that's true. I think we're just going to assess where they are, where they've been, where they were before COVID, where they are after COVID, what their plans are to reopen. And that'll give us a good sense of how we might be able to help them. And we'll ask them.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear about the expectation. It's not necessarily in the context of tourism or room tax dollars being the solution. Your exploration is more broad scope than that.
Yes, I think so. I think one of the things we did ask the ACOT organizations before we made the 30% cut was to say, is this 30% cut going to shut you down? And everybody, that this is not going to be a $10,000 problem that an organization has. This is going to be, if somebody is thinking about closing, all of these organizations, they know how to float $10,000 or $20,000 for a little while. They can deal with that. This will be a much bigger scenario if we need to try to save an organization. Right. And that'll be a community. We'll have to help them. I just want to say one thing on a good note, is that the work that the legislature and that the community has done over the years we really have strong organizations. The fact that nobody has closed yet, the fact that most of these organizations own their own buildings, they're not paying rent or mortgage anymore, especially the larger ones. That's a real testament to the support of the arts in this community, and to some of the work that the ACOT grant has done. So thank you.
Absolutely. How does everybody feel about that, moving forward with that larger scope question?
I just have a question, Anna. That's a question that'll go to all of the agencies that are funded through the tourism program, correct? Not just the ACOT?
Correct. That's my understanding, Nick, that we can't isolate out. I see Nick has actually.
Nick's tied up with his little guy.
Yeah, I see some crying going on. But yeah, I think, to be fair, as Kelly pointed out, oh, no crying, that would be important.
I'll speak for Nick that I think that message is heard, and we'll work closely with Josh and Kelly to make sure that happens.
Annie, Henry, Mike, Martha, can I get a yes or no? You're in agreement with that moving forward?
Yeah, sure. A comprehensive look at all the organizations. I would point folks to the Human Services Coalition review, and kind of they have a well-oiled way of looking at agency strength, and I can actually forward their committee packet to whoever wants to, if that's helpful for them.
That would be great.
Okay, thanks.
I would love to see that. Annie?
That sounds great to me. This has been very helpful, so thank you.
Absolutely. Mike?
I'm sure. I mean, if that's what the committee decides to do going forward, that sounds fine.
Henry?
Yes, that sounds fine.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh, for committing to do that work. Thank you, Dan, for your commitment to continue the conversation. Nick and Katie, too. Kelly, thank you for all the work you put in. I know you have donated a ridiculous amount of time to this evaluation, along with the other executive committee and budget committee with Josh. So thank you so much. And I'm going to move on. That was a longer conversation, but I think it really needed to happen. We have transportation next. We have an ITCTC budget transfer, I'm sorry. That's ID 9407. And Kathy, do we need to vote on this? Or is this, I think we do.
No, that's information only.
Information only. Anybody have any questions for Fernando about these? Fernando, is there any information you want to tell us about it specifically?
No. Yes, I can explain that these transfers are needed in order to accommodate the different budget calendars that the Transportation Council has compared to the county. So we're basically telling the county where our budget's going to stand as of the beginning of next year, of January 2020.
Any questions? Okay, thank you so much, Fernando.
Anna,
I see your hand now, Martha. Yes, please.
Yeah, not about the transfers, Fernando, but about the federal transportation reauthorization, the federal bill that's being discussed in Congress right now. I assume that's something that you care about a lot. Are you tracking it?
Yes, we're tracking it. We get regular reports from the National NPO Association. At this time, it's very much, nothing is defined yet. The House has put out a bill that is pretty generous and views transportation as a way to re-energizing the economy. It's hard to determine what's going to come out of the Senate, but we're kind of hoping that, and that's something it's not new that transportation is used. It has very good multipliers for employment, and every dollar spent generates more money for the economy. So we're hoping that wisdom permeates our decision makers at the federal level, and that we get a robust transportation bill. The other question is about the schedule. And personally, this is me, I don't think that anything is going to be completed by this fall, given the election and everything. And it's more likely than not that there's going to be a continuation of the existing budget. So we've been all advised to have a flat budget into the next fiscal year. And that's what's reflected in those transfers. Personally, I don't expect there'll be a bill pass probably till the spring of 2021.
I thought they have to by law reauthorize the transportation bill by September 30th.
Well, yes, although they have the option of extending it.
Okay.
The last time that we were in this situation, they did something like 7 or 8 extensions before they actually got to final bill.
Okay.
I'm going to jump in, Martha, just to interrupt for 1 second. Kathy, can you send Scott Vanderpool a link to the Zoom? Thank you. Sorry to cut you off, Martha.
No, that's it. I was just curious where Fernando, what his thoughts were. Thanks, Fernando.
Thank you.
Moving on in transportation, I have, I think, Kathy, you sent the Zoom link to him?
Yes, I just did.
Scott, have you gotten that?
Yep, I see it right here.
Wonderful. So if you could jump in for a few minutes, that would be wonderful.
Can I get the, because I can't do unfortunately, I can't do the link. I can't have my email up on my laptop. It affects how I Zoom. So do you have the number instead of the link?
It should be in that email.
It should be in the email.
Not there.
Very-
Okay, numbers here.
Very bottom of the email.
It's the very bottom of the email.
Okay,
All right,
I got it now.
great. So if you call in, that would be great.
Yeah, if I can do that, let me hang up. I'll call in.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Scott is calling in right now. In the meantime, Katie, did you have anything you wanted to add to a commissioner's report?
Yes, I wanted to share an update with you all on the rental assistance program. That, as you may recall, INHS is administering for us, and that started receiving applications on June 15th. So we've had a little bit of time with it now. We've had 52 households within Tompkins County start applications. 24 of those were from the city of Ithaca, which, as you recall, the city of Ithaca has its own pot of money for this program, and Tompkins County, with the reallocation of our CDBG grant, had to be outside of the city lines. All 52 of the applications are from people making 60% AMI or less. And so far, 16 of the 52 have completed their whole screening process, submitted all the required information, and they're well on their way to receiving the 3 months of emergency rental assistance support. And
what's the main way that people are hearing about the program?
They've created a whole marketing strategy with INHS. I know we've also really, I think for the first time with actual CDBG funds, been working really closely with our Department of Social Services on this program. So their caseworkers are knowing about it and sharing information, and we're making sure that nobody's slipping through the cracks who might be able to apply and benefit from these funds. We are distributing flyers at food hubs, food banks, where we were working with school districts to get them put in the school lunch program. So we've been really trying to reach populations that might not hear about it in traditional means, as well as do the traditional means on top of it. Yeah, and so also on a less good note, we still have no news about how non-entitlement communities are going to access the CARES money that is supposed to be coming out for CDBG funding through the states. And then finally wanted to let you know that the planning directors from the Southern Tier 8 region have started our review of ARC applications, grant applications. We're in the pre-application stage, and we're reviewing 17 of them. And only one includes Tompkins County, but that one looks like a good one. And the applications really are primarily focused on workforce development, skill development, and health providers and health services in the region.
Henry first. Thank you, Katie.
Yes, thanks, Katie. Do you know what the number of what's the estimated number of households that you can help with that funding would be?
You know, I believe it was 150. Yeah. And just for a reminder, 60% AMI, that roughly translates to $51,000 a year for a 4-person household in our area.
And the other thing to note too, Henry, is the conversation was when, if we use this money up, it may potentially open us up for more funding. That's unclear. So it isn't necessarily completely dried up. If we do get, I think the state, Katie, had communicated with us that it's a wait and see on how much need there is of the program.
Yeah, we were basically the first county in New York to start this program, and actually Megan and David have been fielding many calls from other counties looking to do it as well. And you know, the devil's always in the details, but we've had a great partnership with INHS to work that out.
Also, Katie, how much money was given from the city? Because if you said you got 25 applications from the city, I assume that basically cleans them out.
190,000.
Yeah, the city has far fewer resources than we were able to bring through the reallocation of our housing rehab money.
Okay, thank you.
Martha?
Thanks, Katie. This sounds great, but it also feels like 16 families is so few. Is the application process difficult? Is there, I mean, you've had, I don't know, it seems like pretty slow going.
Yeah, it wasn't the deluge of applications that we expected. I will say, I think with our marketing approach here in Tompkins, we're seeing a lot more than they are seeing from the other counties that are being served through this kind of one-stop shop program. So I don't know. I think everyone's trying to figure that out. There are a lot of details with it, but INHS has worked very hard to make sure they have the appropriate resources to help people handhold through the process. So I don't necessarily think it's any kind of backlog on their part or a particularly difficult application to fill out. I think it's really just getting the word out, and you know, maybe some of the stimulus payments that have been going on have been helping people for a little while. You know, I think it's kind of it's in a way a good sign because it's a manageable number of applications that are working their way through the process, and it's one that will be able to continue the program for a while this way.
So if we don't use up all the money on the, was it March, April, May rent? Was that what's to be?
It's 3 months rent. It's not tied to a particular date. It has to be COVID related, but it's not particular months. It's 3 months worth of rental assistance.
Okay. All right. Thanks a million. Appreciate it.
One last question, and then we have we have Scott Vanderpool online, wonderful, and we can go back to transportation, and then to our TCAD presentation, which I'm excited for everybody to see. Katie, the CDBG funding from federal, that has already gone to state, it just hasn't been distributed, isn't that correct?
That is correct. That's my understanding.
Do we know, can you remind me how much that was that went to state, went to New York?
You know, I don't have that at the tip of my fingers. I do know that Megan in my office has been tracking that closely and is in touch with state people to find out when that might be released and how we can access it.
Jason, is that something that's being discussed in the meetings you are having with state?
I'm sorry, I did not catch the first part of that. I apologize.
So there's CDBG funding from the CARES Act, and that was distributed for non-entitlement communities out to the states, but then has not been distributed from states, nor is there any guidelines of how we can access any of it. Has that been discussed in your meetings with the state?
What I've taken away from that is that there was the ability to repurpose funds, but I have not had any guidance or direction on new funding available through CDBG for non-entitlement communities.
Is that a question you could add for this coming week of where the CARES Act additional CDBG funding is and whether or not they have guidelines yet to distribute it?
I think there's still some confusion as whether or not there is funding or whether or not it's the ability to repurpose funding, but I will ask the question.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, and we're happy to report back in July on what we learn on this topic too.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Scott, thank you for joining us and thank you for giving us your update. Really appreciate it. I'd love to get some information if you want to give us sort of your sense of where things are. I know that you, from your report, you are down to a 5% ridership from where you were this time last year, and getting a sense of what the impact is and what potential support you're getting would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Anna. We are actually increasing ridership very slowly. We're probably between 10 and 15% now, which isn't great. We've had some. We have our 20 passenger limit per bus, and we've gone over that a couple times, which is good news. But it's on the 15, 14. Some of the shopping routes have been a little more robust than some of the other rural trips. But I met with Cornell yesterday, and the folks were talking about preparing for school that's not official, but we're hoping for good news from Cornell. And it's hard to prepare. It takes us a couple of months to get ready for that next sign-up period. There's a lot of work that has to be done with routing and scheduling. So we're busy with that. Our PPE measures have been in place. The latest news that we have for what we're doing is putting up plexiglass barriers for our drivers in an effort to start fare collection again. So we're hoping to start fare collection in probably the day after Labor Day or the beginning of the fall sign-up, which is probably the 23rd or the 24th of August, somewhere in that area when we expect school to return for Cornell. So, we've done everything we can. We are working on some heavy marketing video that would show folks. I know Jason's going to be in on one of those videos to show that it is safe to ride the bus. And that's pretty cool. So signage messaging is going to be real important. We've talked about that throughout the county. And that's critical for us to try to get people back on the bus. We do have a strict enforcement for wearing masks on the bus. There's a little complication with medical conditions, but we're handing out masks and are, basically stating on the shelters, on the side of our bus, on the side of our fare box that, you need a mask to ride. And we think that's important to try to bring people back to show. That's what all these videos are for, to show that, the bus is really going to be a safe place. So that's pretty much what I can think of off the top of my head, but I'm here for questions as well.
I don't see any from anyone, but I had one for you, which is if the service is down by 30, you're down to 30, 35%, 35 to 40%. I'm assuming the rides that have been cut the most are the ones that are going out to the most rural, that always had the lowest ridership. And my concern, of course, is the impact on lower income populations that are living in the most rural areas. You were exploring a pilot last year in Dryden for the first mile, last mile. There were discussions about a potential van fleet for the smaller areas at one point. I'm curious how we are serving the lower income populations and the more rural populations, if that's possible now, and what the impact has been.
Yeah, we expect to, there's not a lot of ridership on those rural areas, but we expect to bring those back in the fall. I think that the service the times may be limited, the frequency may be limited, but we want to concentrate on getting people to essential services. So there's been some survey work that's been put out. We hope that that's going to help. We'll do whatever we can to make sure everybody is accommodated, especially to essential services.
Looks like Scott is frozen.
Yep. Am I freezing?
You just for a second.
Okay. Okay, I just plugged directly into my my internet connection, so I won't freeze. So the first mile, last mile project is ongoing. It's tough to get data collection right now because obviously we don't have we don't know what to expect. The ridership is not there like it has been in the fall and early spring. So, but we are continuing, and we may use the first mile, last mile project to actually do something a little bit different for these smaller communities and to support them. So we're thinking along those lines very soon. So we have to do something fairly quickly because we don't want to lose that ridership permanently. So there's a lot of thought. It's a tough question to answer, but thank you for asking because it's really important. Those people are important to us. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I have Henry, then Jason.
Sure, Scott. Thanks for the report. I was wondering, with your conversation with Cornell, how are you going to social distance people on the bus like the 10 in the future?
Thanks, Henry. Good question. We are going to continue our limit of 20 people per bus, and I'm hoping that we have signage to put on the seats so it separates people. But we're hoping that the Cornell students are able to, I mean, there's going to be a lot of messaging between, and we talked about this yesterday, messaging between Cornell and our folks at TCAT so that people are respecting social distancing and wearing masks. So that communication has to take place. But the other thing that we're doing is not only limiting the number of people on the bus, but we're going to have backup buses in strategic places so that we can bring them in when there's that limit. We've gone over that 20 passenger limit. So I'm hoping that answers your question, Henry. That's a good one, though. Thank you. Great to hear from you.
Yes, I was also wondering, when do you? I know your fare free schedule lasts until the end of the month. When are you going to update your schedules?
The schedules, the actual public schedule of the different routes is going to stay the same, but we're going to put a message out probably the end of the week. I'm having a board meeting tonight, and they're going to approve the extension of the suspension of fares through till probably the day after Labor Day. And then that's when the new, that would likely coincide with the newer schedule that will be published.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jason?
Just want to say one thing. First of all, Scott, I got back on riding the bus this week. It was a good ride. Everything was clean. It was great. The service was wonderful as usual. Rode my bike from Teaburg down and rode back, and it was a good ride. I'll do it again tomorrow. So good to see that the bus is still working and limited schedule, but still was able to do it with my schedule. So I appreciate it. Looking forward to Wednesday too, and helping with the promotion of TCAT.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Also, just so the committee knows, Scott and I have spoken, as well as with Dwight and Dina, just in the past about the stimulus CARES Act funding, how to support both TCAT as well as the other.
Get about.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I wanted to say Roundup, but I'm thinking something else. Get about.
Very different.
And how that can help support the loss of revenue and expenses related to COVID. So we've been in active discussions around it, and we'll continue to be to make sure that it continues to support public transportation as it was intended to. So that's all I just wanted to add.
Thank you.
And we have one more presentation, and I want to make sure that we have a good 20 minutes for it, which I had promised Curt, and I really think it's a good one. Martha, if you have a brief question for Scott, please, by all means.
Yeah, one question was about the backup buses for when you go over 20. It's important not to leave people on the sidewalk without an option. Briefly on the transportation reauthorization at the federal level, how are you doing on that sort of lobbying effort with Cornell, with Diane Miller and all?
Right. We are preparing for that. I know I've talked to Diane. She still has to get back to me about setting up the meeting, and we're going to include Chuck Schumer as well. So like you stated, and it will be under Diane's jurisdiction, as she told me as well. So, and this is all about supporting our build grant. And we're setting that up. We're talking about either a PowerPoint or a one pager to go along with that, and we're in those discussions. Mike Hall is also asked to join our conversation as well. I'll give everybody an update once we gather some more information or set up some times. So I think from this group, I'm not sure, Martha, if you're going to be involved, but I think maybe Deborah from the Legislature is going to be in on those conversations as well.
Yeah, Jason and Deborah.
Okay.
Deborah, yeah.
Okay. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks very much. Great.
Okay. Thanks, Martha.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I don't know if Kathy has your presentation, Curt, if you all sent that into her so that she can load it, or you are, I don't know if Kathy, if you have access to that, or Curt can load it from his computer.
I haven't sent it yet. If it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and then send it out after.
I don't know. I'm so distracted by your amazing facial hair that I took me a second to regroup.
Well, I'm only realizing now that I lost my cover. I was telling Johanna, I said, well, Jason Molino's got a big beard. You know, I can do it too. And I see today that it's gone. So now I fear telling her later today.
I'm sorry, man. I should have communicated with you more about my plan. I'm sorry I let you down.
You left him hanging, Jason. Hanging.
Give me another 3 months and I'll catch back up. All right.
Yeah, no, it was impressive. So I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay. And,
yeah, I think that's possible. I don't know the tech, but I hope so.
Thumbs up or down, whether you can see that.
Wonderful.
Here we go. All good?
All good.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Curt Anderson, Director of Development and Strategy for Tompkins County Area Development. When coronavirus was still novel, Heather asked me to come up with a list of some indicators that we could watch to evaluate the scope and scale of the local economic impact here in Tompkins County. Instead of staring out at the federal government, realizing that we all know that we're very different from them, and trying to identify a few things that might give us a better window into how it's affecting us locally. Some of you folks who are on the TCAD board have seen an iteration of this presentation, but I should let you know it will be new because, as with any large data set, I found an error on week 5 that had a lot of tentacles. So this is going to be new for some of you, and some of the data you're going to see. And again, I'll share this when we're done. And basically, this is just a snapshot of where we're at. We started monitoring a variety of things in early March, and we're going to continue indefinitely, and it changes week to week and month to month. So we'll start with the 5 Ws. Essentially, to my knowledge, TCAD is the only entity that's curating this data set on local indicators, but it's not just ours. We collect it from a variety of sources and want to share that. So it's now starting to go external. And again, it's kind of it's a running total. So it changes every time we meet or you ask. As I mentioned, we started collecting data in early March. You'll see that in a second. And the focus really was real time. So an annualized GDP doesn't really mean anything for us right now. And it's quite easy to track, but if it were needed, but you know, we're trying to look for real time data, and that's weekly, monthly, or at worst quarterly, to kind of see these fluctuations over time. And then really the main goal is to evaluate the depth and distance of the economic impacts here in Tompkins County. You know, how long is it going to last and how bad is it going to be? And then compare that to some external, for instance, the region or the state or even the federal government. And so to do that, we've got to draw data from a whole host of publicly accessible information, but it's not particularly easy to digest or find. And so that includes the Federal Reserve, the Department of Labor, both at the state and the federal level. Jobs EQ is a database that we subscribe to as a product of Chimera Analytics. And then we get some travel data from the ICVB as well. And so it's a whole host of things that we're, like I said, we're just curating on behalf of everyone. So I'm going to start off a little introductory slide, and I'm going to show you something that's pretty shocking. But most leading economists, I'm not an economist, I should say that, but I am a bit of a stat head. And I've said in a lot of webinars, nobody thinks that this is going to be a depression. In the Great Depression, unemployment rose to 25%. And actually, the real indicator of the Great Depression was that it stayed above 10% for over a decade. I mean, that alone, it was the spike that was bad, but it was the duration of an elevated number like that. By contrast, we entered this pandemic with a fairly strong economy. Unemployment is still expected to peak. I know it's gone down a little bit, or at least the figures would indicate it. Folks still think it's going to peak around 20%, and that's going to happen by all accounts Q4 of this year or first quarter next. But regardless of number, they seem to agree that pre-COVID employment will be back by Q3 of 2022. So essentially, we're looking at about 2 years of abnormalities before we get back, and it'll take even longer for GDP to recover. But at least we'll be back to employment levels within the next 2 years. So this is kind of a prepare to be shocked here, but this again is from Chmura Analytics. The monthly employment change in March 2020, which is the far right line, the orange line that's plunging down, was roughly equivalent to the 08-09 recession, which is in the shaded area on the left side of that graph. It's a loss of nearly 800,000 jobs, certainly severe. And then April numbers came out. This is the exact same graph with one more month's worth of data, but with a scale that'll match the almost 30-fold decline in jobs from 800,000 in March to 21 million in April. So again, same graph, but with a scale that it reflects how bad it was in April. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We are in completely uncharted territory right now. And I would say even professional economists are trying to figure out what's going to happen here.
Curt, I can't see anything on your screen. It's blank.
I don't know. It's not blank on mine.
Oh, it's not.
I can see the March graph and the April graph. What we're looking at, Annie, is that the last month obliterates the entire graph and makes the rest of the graph look like zero, while April is, I've never seen anything like it.
Right. So is everybody else able to see it? Because it says Curt Anderson is sharing the screen, but it's blank.
Were you able to see anything before this, Annie?
No.
You haven't seen any of the presentation?
No.
Well, how's my narration then?
The narration was very good.
I can see it.
I can see it, Curt.
I can see it too.
By your long mustache too.
I can see I'm just distracted by your mustache. So.
Focus, people. Focus.
Annie, I'm going to send you a screenshot of just this one. Everybody else, I guess, can see it, but you. I don't know why, but I'm going to send you this screenshot.
Well, and I'll send this presentation out immediately after, so you'll see all of it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Right, back to business here. Let's see. Okay, so shock value aside, federal data is often very cumbersome. It's not very responsive, and it certainly doesn't really reflect what our situation is here, as I mentioned. So again, we set out to say, what can we watch here? What data can we get? How do we get it? And how does it affect us? So the New York State Department of Labor makes available weekly UI claims, unemployment insurance claims by county. And that really is in response to our requests and other folks who wanted to get this data. They have it. It just hadn't been publicly available. It's at the end of a long weekly report. But we dig through and we get that information. We can also get unemployment and employment numbers by sector, which may prove helpful in the future. I mentioned ICVB gives us some monthly travel data. So we've moved from weekly data to monthly. And among those things, we're looking at occupancy rates. It's not just hotels, but we can look at Airbnb or VRBO or any of those things, and try to get an idea of again, how deep it goes, but when do we get back on track essentially? So travel data there. And then the really intriguing one, and the one that I had made a mistake on in previous presentations, are online job ads. So these are reduced. They're available weekly through our Jobs EQ database. Their redundancy is reduced or eliminated. And essentially job ads is a measure of jobs lost. So how many fewer ads are being posted, i.e. as some indicator of the jobs that just aren't there anymore. And then ads closed being a proxy for hires. It's an index, but it gives you a look into, who's hiring, where, and when, essentially. So initial UI claims have declined to approximately 250 a week. We had a little spike last week. I'm not exactly sure why that happened, but so we spiked early in March up to 1,500 and then have come down off of that ledge. It's still way over our average, which is roughly 25 new claims a week for the year prior. But it's roughly, Tompkins County's had just over 9,000 initial UI claims since, 2-3 months ago. And it hasn't quite leveled off yet. So we're going to keep watching this one over time. And again, this is one that the Department of Labor, I bugged them, and I'm sure other people did. And now we're starting to get that data so we can keep an eye on it. It's not as confusing as it looks, I promise. Our unemployment rate spiked, obviously, and the total employment has changed as well. You'll notice to the far end of the red line there, that's our unemployment rate, just over, it was 10.1. You'll see this in a second, but we're down to 7.8 right now, 7.8. So it's really starting to come down, and I'm actually going to give you a comparison in a little bit to see how that relates on a relative scale. But the bend is much sharper. It's going to take longer for employment to match that. But it is trending in the right direction. And I think that's a testament. Someone earlier mentioned the strength of our community, and that will help a lot coming out of this.
Just quick question, Curt, before you move on. That unemployment, is it potentially going down because people are stopping to look? They fall out of the unemployment rate when they're no longer actively looking, right?
That's correct. Yeah, that is certainly a possibility. And what you may see is they stop looking, particularly because they're getting that extra bonus and unemployment insurance. So, but that's set to end. But yeah, the unemployment rate is a very interesting number in general. But yeah, I can't exactly explain what's going on, but certainly those people that stopped looking would not be reflected in this.
Okay, thank you.
The proportion of available room nights reserved can be translated into revenue generation. And you'll see the hotels are the red line. I really want to call your attention to the bright lines here. So the bright red line, which you can see plummeting through April from the year-over-year average, and even Airbnb. So you're talking a hotel revenue decline through April. I don't yet have the May numbers, and I apologize for that, but you're talking almost a $5 million decline from last year this time, that is being in April. So it's absolutely no wonder that some of the tourism programs have been canned this year, because there's just no money to back it up. That's a $5 million loss. And you look even at Airbnb, it's down by half, right? It's down $1 million from the same month last year. But that gives you an indication of really, people being cooped up at home and or not comfortable to travel right now. So, this will change over time. I look forward to seeing these lines more closely reflect previous years, to come back together essentially. But for right now, there's a wide gap for sure.
And that December to February drop is normal. It's the picking up at the end that is not happening that we expect.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right, because it mirrors itself from 2019 to 2020 until the February, essentially.
Right.
So when will those two lines come back together? That's why we're looking at all this data and keeping an eye on it. And but you're right, that hotel drop is big, and I don't have to tell a lot of people on this call how much that affects us. So this is the job ads one, and I want to again, for those folks who've seen this presentation before, I will admit to an error in a large database that did have a lot of tentacles. So the numbers were reversed essentially, but this one is correct, and I have double and triple checked it. But you're looking at, this is a weekly jobs posted, again, which is an indicator of jobs lost, and then ads closed being hiring. The assumption being that if an ad's closed, a position has been filled, and that's because of a hire. But both of them obviously decline from the start of really, I'd say pre-COVID. They were climbing up, they've both come down. And what's picking up right now are the ads posted, so that there are more jobs being made available. Again, this is an index, so this is not an exactly true reflection, but what has not matched that increase are the ads closed. So to put it bluntly, people aren't hiring, right? So, or they're I think the only reason you're seeing the ads closed, again, a proxy for hire, starting to increase right now, is just because people are either pulling ads, i.e. they're uncertain about their own economic future, or they're just not hiring people. So this is going to be interesting over time, again, to watch this fluctuation of both ads posted and ads closed over time, and hopefully they start to more closely mimic one another. So the big question is really, how do we rank, right? So this is all well and good, and it will be interesting to watch over time and those fluctuations. But how do we rank to our region or to the state? How bad is it, relatively speaking? And that's the big thing. So this, again, you will have this later, but just for comparison's sake, we'll look at unemployment rate. So if you go to the far left column, you're looking at April 2020. We had a 10.1% unemployment rate in Ithaca. Best in our region, one of the best in the state, certainly better by percentage points than those other geographic areas. And we saw from the federal government that the unemployment numbers declined, and they did pretty much across the board, and including ours. So we're still several percentage points as far as unemployment is concerned ahead of those other regions. And Anna, you brought it up. There may be folks that just aren't looking anymore or have stopped looking, but that's going to be across the board. That's not just going to be in Tompkins County. So a pound for pound, we're doing better than our comrades. And you move over to the right side of this graph, and you're looking at essentially percent change year over year in employment, and we're right in the mix. We're certainly better than New York State. The split screens there for Southern Tier is because they don't actually offer that number, total employment for the Southern Tier region. So I just did Binghamton and Elmira, but I have some theories on why Elmira has improved, but I think there's just not a lot of jobs down there. But again, we're right in the mix. We're certainly better than the state, which is again a testament to the community and the work that you folks and others are doing. So when aggregated by phase, so this does not include all of the industries by phase, just the ones that had a fair data set that I could actually pull in. So we're not looking at an industry that might have had one or two postings, but ads posted is trending in the right direction. So from March 2nd to 21 June, the phase one industries as a percentage they're growing. Phase two has been sluggish. It is, and I think that's probably attributed to the fact that a lot of the phase two folks can work from home. You don't need as many people to deliver those products, but phase three and phase four is trending in the right direction as far as ads posted go. So that's certainly, we're below ads posted, that is jobs, number of jobs. We're below pre-COVID times, but some of these phases are ramping up. Ads closed, on the other hand, this is hiring. We're still down almost across the board, save for phase four. And I'm going to show you in a second some of the jobs that constitute those industries, and you'll see which ones are carrying the bulk of that. But essentially, ads closed, still way down. Again, phase two is not, the industries included in phase two really haven't been hiring. They're all lower. Phase four is certainly ramping up. So try to give you a better picture of certain occupations within those phases. So in phase one, manufacturing is pumping on all cylinders. That would include other production occupations. Now, again, this is a relative percentage, so this isn't exactly number of jobs. And manufacturing is I would say a lower contributor to the total overall workforce. But I suspect that's actually because most every manufacturer around here was deemed as essential. So they're really, if there was any shutdown, it wasn't for long, and they're back up and running. Construction is way down, and I thought this was kind of interesting, but I suspect, so in our conversations with industry leaders in construction, they said, even when we get the go ahead in April, it's going to take a month or more to ramp back up. And I think the reason that you're seeing the red, which is ads closed, so hires essentially being so low, is that the first people to come back were those furloughed workers, or those tradesmen that technically they weren't unemployed. So that it'll take a while, I suspect, for construction to continue to grow and hire new people instead of just bringing the people back. Phase two, retail's above board. All the others are moving slower. Again, I suspect, these are just my thoughts, that's related to remote or work from home scenarios that often work for white collar workers, but not some of the other industries. Food and beverage workers in phase three are returning in greater numbers, as our appetite and tolerance for risk increases. And then I mentioned phase four, and you see at the top there that the industries that are really going gangbusters are teachers. Schools, I'm involved with our school board, planning various fall scenarios with uncertain budgets. But one thing that's consistent is that their population continues to grow. They need to hire more teachers. And this is about the time of year that you're going to be doing that. So that is carrying the weight for phase four. When you look down at the arts and entertainment, I mean, it's flatlined. It's totally dead right now. And a lot of that's to do with the, with social distancing requirements. There's fewer people coming through the doors. There's fewer people that are needing to be hired to accommodate the fewer people that arrive. So, but it's going to be interesting to see over time. Again, we're measured from early March, and this will go on indefinitely to see a snapshot pretty much every month. I do this same chart, and we can see how that's going to change over time, but gives you an idea of which occupations are moving right now, and allows us to kind of keep track of some of those folks that are either lagging or kind of up and comers. Excuse me. So the question is, what do we do with it all, right? So I spend an inordinate amount of time on Monday afternoons and Tuesday mornings compiling all this data, but that's all well and good, but what do we do with it, right? So as I mentioned, it's really to determine the depth and distance of the impact here in Tompkins County. So, how long is it going to be? Are we faster or slower than the state? I think you've seen so far that we're probably on a better track, certainly. And again, it's the work that you and others are doing. But, we're just going to keep watching this as we go through. I say indefinitely. It's probably going to be a 2-year data set, and but it starts with starting to collect this now and keep an eye on it. We also want to look at the strength of our existing industries, maybe identify some folks who are, as I mentioned, up and comers, or who need some extra assistance to pump some life back into them. And finally, we want to support our stakeholders, right? This isn't our data. This is publicly accessible data. I'm just curating it, and help guide our initiatives, guide your initiatives, recovery, whatever. We're just trying to be helpful and, provide data that help people make informed decisions. That really is the goal and the use of data. And so that's my contact information right there. These are the things that we've investigated that we can follow. If there's something I'm missing, or you think I'm missing, or something you want to see, I'd encourage you to reach out to me. Again, you'll have these slides with my contact info in it, but we want to help you too. So again, I'm not a trained economist, so I would just, I like tips and things I can look at, and some leads work and some don't, but if the data's out there, I will find it. And I just want to say thanks for letting me hang out.
Thank you so much, Curt. This is wonderful information. We have run over by a few minutes, and I just want to check with people. No, not your problem, mistake or anything. Are people okay staying for an extra 5 minutes to ask questions? Mike, are you okay with that?
Yes.
Martha?
Yes,
Okay. Great. Henry? Henry?
I put him to sleep.
He might have disappeared.
Yes.
I see from Anne, please say tradespeople or workers
Yep.
rather than tradesmen. Yes, I agree. That's a good point, Annie.
I was trying to say that quietly.
Oh, I apologize. No, I think it's really valuable for all of us.
Slip of the tongue.
It's wonderful. I think it's great. And Curt, it's just as much for all of us, really, for me too. So Martha, I see you have a question.
yeah, thanks. Hi, Curt. I think this is the first time I've sort of seen you in a meeting, so it's good to know you're here. How do the data account for furloughs? If somebody is, like, we furloughed nearly 100 employees, did they apply for unemployment insurance, and did they count in your data, or how does that work?
I don't have the answer. That's a really good question. I'm still learning on how unemployment rate is actually calculated. What I can do is go back to UI claims. And for instance, we could pick a few industries that we know are a lot of furloughed workers, for instance, tradespeople. And we could actually look at UI claims over time for those industries, and get, what I can do is essentially gauge the number of UI claims by the number of employed in that industry. So there are ways to get to that data. I don't have it on hand, but I could look into it and get back to you.
I mean, as I asked the question, I realized I know our folks who were furloughed did apply for unemployment, because we figured that into our calculations, especially with the $600 plus up from the feds. So we were trying to make sure people weren't actually hurt. So I know that, so I guess I'm assuming they applied for unemployment. But then we hope at least some of them will come back. So there's no way to actually judge that, how many are going to come back. So then the bigger question is, how much of an impact do you think the public sector will have on this? Is that fully reflected in our unemployment numbers? You mentioned teachers, but counties, local governments, cities are in the process right now of furloughing and may decide on permanent layoffs. Do you know how that's counted?
I do not know, but I'm really curious. Now we're on teachers. Given the budget uncertainties, the fact that the state's running a massive deficit and is talking about cutting funding for those for public education, it'll be interesting to see over time whether those folks are actually employed or if they just are essentially furloughed or told not to report. So I don't know exactly how that's covered or calculated. I'm still playing around with all the data sets. This is new to me as well.
Okay, and on the other hand, public health guidelines for teachers and daycare, et cetera, are requiring the same number of adults for 30 or 40 or 50% of the students. So they may actually need to hire more to cover the same number of kids. So, all right, thanks very much.
Yeah, yep. As time goes on, it becomes more and more interesting, and I'm only one person trying to interpret data, but there are probably other conclusions that I'm missing.
Thank you.
Curt, you've reviewed this. You have advisors that are economists though, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I talk to Christian Harris with DOL all the time. I'm on various webinars, but no, I don't have a neighbor that's an economist or anyone to call, but I just pay attention and geek out on stuff like this.
Yeah, we'll have to dig up some Cornell economists too to
There you go.
converse with. I got a few I can throw at you
Perfect.
that are amazing. Anyway,
Yeah.
Annie.
And we've shared that data with Cornell. So I certainly would love some names because I would like to pick some brains. But I don't know who's seen it up there, who hasn't, but they seem to be happy with it. So
Great. Yeah, ILR, there's some people that might be very interested. Annie.
Yeah, that would be good to hook you up or us up with some economists to evaluate and talk about that. That would, I would appreciate that, and I think that'd be information, to gather to aggregate this information and the opinions to help push this out, to the public, for what it is worth. I know it would be opinions. So I'll start with the big elephant in the room is, when we see Johanna come to a committee, she's reporting from the basement. So that's
what's the deal?
No, okay. That'll be just something I'll text her about. But so what I was able to get back into the Zoom. I signed back in and I was able to then to see your last chart. So I will look forward to seeing that. I was wondering, how did you say you redo that data every week?
yeah.
Is that correct?
Anything that's available weekly. So off the top of my head, the weekly UI claims, the jobs data, that's the one that the jobs data takes the most time. And I got that little tip from our Chimera Analytics, being on a variety of webinars from them. So there's a lot of power in there. I just don't know how to wield it entirely just yet. But that's the one with a massive database, because there's 1,000 occupation classification codes. So I have to sort all that and rejigger it into a 3-digit that makes it a little bit more manageable. But I do it every week. And then every couple of weeks I get back in to look for new numbers in the other categories. But yeah, it's a Monday project. It's a ramp back up to work kind of thing.
Well, maybe that's why I couldn't see it, because I don't have my jiggering software updated on my computer. But so I was wondering, on a serious note, that for maybe this is information, just kind of a question for Anna and the other committee members, like if some of this could be presented to the full legislature at some point, because just to give us and us all a sense of what's going on, or if you're presenting again, and I was thinking I would love to see this information, at least monthly, not saying that you have to report, but just to be able to see this as like a monthly report to the legislature, so we know. And that's all I had.
Yeah, and
thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. I had originally presented to the executive committee of TCAD, and I had a bunch of graphics that would drop in over top of one another, but I realized that makes for a terrible PDF. And I've since tried to clean that up, so every slide you'll see has got information in it. So yeah, you're right. I don't necessarily have to present, but I will ask Heather if that's okay with her, but I'd be happy to just kind of update this monthly so that you have it as a running total.
Right.
That would be great. Sorry.
Even if it was presented once to say, for instance, the legislature, that with your presentation, then they're going to know how to interpret, the numbers from there. Because to me, looking at I feel very hopeful, where if we don't have information, we don't know. And for some, for me and for other people, we tend to worry, and I don't want to think the worst. So to have this data, and know what we know, even if it's bad news, I want to know what we do know.
That's my favorite part about data. And you're right. I probably more than others have had a very optimistic outlook, because it is bad. I mean, this is not good. No one's saying that it is, but comparatively speaking, it's getting better. And I talked to Johanna about it. This is a really incredible community. I think the thought that's been put into the businesses that we're attracting and how we treat them and how we care for them, it's not like anything we've seen in some of the other places we've lived. And the data kind of bear that out, and that gives me great optimism.
Thank you, Annie. I agree that one of the reasons I asked Curt to present, asked Heather if that was possible, is explicitly for what you just said, that it was not as like long-term negative as I thought. You know, the current situation is horrible forever for the, you know, planet. But well, actually just for the human part, this data doesn't, I think, infer anything beyond that. But yeah, that is why I wanted to see it. And I will speak to Leslie and Curt if you're okay with that, to see if this can be presented at the larger, even if it's a truncated version. So thank you. We have one last question, and then I'm going to close up for the day, for the meeting. Henry?
Yes, thank you, Curt, for the presentation. I was wondering, what was your what's the basis for saying that it'll be a short, a brief depression or brief recession as opposed to be more long-term?
Yeah, that's great. And maybe I didn't make that clear. That's certainly not my impression. I don't have the bandwidth to be able to make those predictions, but in the various webinars I've been on and listened to economists talk, we have talk radio on all the time at the house, but they're pretty much unanimous in saying that this is going to be a fairly sharp but short event. We are in uncharted territory, certainly, but they seem to think that the strength of the economy going in and I think the work that our governor and some others, certainly not all, has been doing that will help pull us out of this thing in a shorter timetable. But that's just, I'm summarizing numerous economists in that one slide.
Yeah, and I agree with Martha's comment that it's relative. It's short compared to a 10-year depression. It's not short. 2 years is painful, will be exceptionally painful for many people. So let's kind of acknowledge it's simply a comparative statement.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful, Curt. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for the extra 15 minutes. You know, it was a longer presentation, but I think it was really valuable. Unless anyone has any last minute questions, I would like to call a motion to adjourn. Can I have someone move that? Annie moves, Mike seconds. All in favor, just give me a thumbs up.
Yep.
Yes.
Wonderful. We are officially adjourned. Kathy, thank you so much, and Michelle, for supporting and staffing this for extra time. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for a great meeting, Anna, and everybody.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Take care.